What would you do if a simple trip to your favorite bakery revealed your wife's darkest secret? I thought my marriage was rock solid, until I found out the truth she was hiding right under my nose. My name's James, I'm 35, and my wife, Lily, is 33. We've been married for nearly a decade, and from the outside, it probably looked like we were one of those couples who had it all figured out. But lately, I can't shake this feeling that something's off. Lily's a pretty private person. She's one of those people who can keep a secret better than anyone I've ever met. I always thought it was one of her strengths, you know. She doesn't let people get under her skin easily. But now, I'm starting to wonder if maybe that's because she's gotten really good at hiding things. And not just little things, big things, things that could change everything. Over the past few months, I've noticed small changes in her behavior. She used to be open with her phone, leaving it anywhere around the house, no big deal. But now, it's always face down or tucked away in her bag. When I ask her about it, she just laughs it off, says she's tired of notifications lighting up the screen. It's a small thing, right? But it doesn't feel small. Lily's always been pretty focused on her work. She's a photographer, and I know how much she loves what she does. It's one of the things that made me fall for her in the first place. But lately, she's been working late more often than usual. Coming home way after dark, saying she had a last-minute shoot or she lost track of time editing. Part of me wants to believe her. But something in me just doesn't. So here I am, questioning every little thing. Maybe I'm overthinking it, right? Maybe it's just a phase, and we're both going through a rough patch. But I can't shake this feeling, and I guess that's why I'm here. So, I tried to brush off those nagging feelings, told myself I was overthinking. But you know how when you get that gut feeling, every little thing starts to feel like a sign. That's where I was, catching myself dissecting every tiny thing she did, looking for a reason to feel calm again. But instead, I just found more reasons to question. The other night, for instance, Lily came home with this tiny box of pastries from a new bakery in town. Now, she's always been a fan of sweets, so it didn't seem strange at first. She told me the pastry chef was amazing and insisted I try a few. I remember thinking it was nice of her to bring something home, a thoughtful gesture. But then I noticed something, she was weirdly distant. Almost like she was watching my reaction too closely, or waiting for something. I asked her if she'd gone with a friend, and she laughed it off, saying, "James, do I really need company to buy a croissant?" And yeah, that made sense. But then there were other things. She was putting a lot more effort into her appearance. Now, Lily's always been beautiful, she could wear pajamas and still look like she stepped out of a magazine. But suddenly, she was dressing up just to run errands, or even to go pick up pastries. I told myself she was just taking care of herself, maybe even feeling a little extra confidence. But that voice in the back of my head? It was still there, whispering doubts. There's a bakery about 10 minutes from our place. It's one of those boutique spots with fresh baked goods and a line out the door every morning. I didn't think much of it at first, but over the past few weeks, Lily's been going there a lot. I even joked that she was keeping them in business single-handedly. She'd laugh, but it was that kind of laugh that didn't feel real, like there was something she didn't want me to know. Looking back, I wish I'd just asked her more. Maybe she would have told me the truth, or maybe I would have caught a glimpse of whatever it was she was hiding. But I didn't. I let it slide, telling myself there was nothing there, nothing to worry about. Then, something happened that made it impossible to ignore. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Lily had mentioned she was going out to the bakery again. She didn't invite me along, which was weird. Usually, weekends were our time together, even if we were just running errands. But that day, she seemed to be in a hurry, brushing me off with a quick kiss on the cheek and a "see you in a bit," before rushing out. An hour later, I got a little curious and decided to take a walk. I don't know what I was expecting to find, Maybe I was hoping to just shake off the feeling by being close to where she said she was. But as I neared the bakery, I spotted her from across the street. There she was, standing just outside the bakery door, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Not at her phone, not waiting in line, but actually talking to someone. And that someone wasn't just any stranger, it was a guy. He looked to be around our age, maybe a bit older, wearing a chef's apron dusted with flour. He had this easy, casual smile, and I could tell he was comfortable with her. The kind of comfortable you don't get with a stranger. I watched them for a minute, unsure what to do. They were standing pretty close, and the way they were looking at each other, something felt wrong. There was this intimacy in the air that I couldn't ignore, even if I wanted to. I watched him hand her a pastry bag, and instead of leaving right away, she lingered, chatting with him a bit longer. They shared another laugh before she finally walked off, clutching the bag tightly and smiling to herself. She didn't see me. I made sure of that. I didn't confront her right away. I walked back home, replaying that scene over and over in my head. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe he was just a friendly baker who liked his customers, and maybe Lily was just being polite. But then, that nagging feeling in my gut was back, stronger than ever, and this time, I couldn't shake it off. When she got back, she acted like everything was normal, like she hadn't just been laughing with some stranger at the bakery. She set the pastry bag down on the counter and gave me a little smile. "Brought you something," she said, her voice light, but I could tell she was avoiding eye contact. I didn't know what to do with what I'd seen. So I just smiled back, thanked her, and bit into a croissant that tasted a little too bitter. After that Saturday, things didn't just feel off, they felt wrong. That night, lying next to her, I couldn't get the image out of my head, Lily standing there with that pastry chef, laughing like they shared some inside joke. She'd turned her back to me in bed, scrolling on her phone as usual, and even though we were just inches apart, it felt like we were miles away. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I told myself that maybe she just needed her own space or had found a friend at the bakery. But I couldn't let it go completely. I mean, this is Lily we're talking about. The woman I married. The one person I was supposed to trust more than anyone. I started watching more closely, noticing patterns I hadn't paid attention to before. Every time she left for the bakery, she'd spend way more time getting ready. I'm talking full hair and makeup, just to go pick up a few pastries. And she was coming home later and later from these trips, claiming the lines were long or she ran into an old friend and lost track of time. Then there was her phone. Lily's always been private with her phone, but it was starting to feel calculated. She'd keep it on silent, face down, or sometimes even tucked away in her purse when she got home. I tried not to think too much of it, but it was becoming obvious. If I casually asked her what she was doing on her phone, she'd say, "Just catching up on messages," with this quick, defensive smile before slipping it back in her bag. I could feel my patience running thin. The doubt and frustration were eating at me, and I knew I had to either talk to her or find some kind of proof. But every time I thought about asking, I'd hesitate. What if I was just being paranoid? What if it really was just a friendly interaction with the baker, and I'd end up looking like the jealous husband? But then, one afternoon, while she was in the shower, I made a choice that felt wrong even as I was doing it. I picked up her phone. I didn't want to snoop, didn't want to be that guy, but the need to know was stronger than my guilt. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it, quickly scanning her messages. And that's when I saw it, a string of texts with someone saved as Ben B. The messages were short, casual, but with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. Things like, "Loved seeing you today, smiling face with smiling eyes," and "Can't wait for the weekend." Nothing outright damning, but enough to set my mind racing. That Saturday morning, I woke up to an empty bed. I glanced at the clock, 7:45 a.m. Lily was usually still asleep on weekends, but her side was cold, the sheets already smoothed over. I listened for the usual sounds of her morning routine, but the house was dead quiet. I checked my phone. No texts, no notes left on the kitchen counter. Just an empty house, and a quiet that felt a little too heavy. Maybe she'd gone to the bakery, I thought. It was her new weekend routine, after all. But this time, it felt different. She'd never left so early before. And she hadn't mentioned any plans to go out. A bad feeling settled in my gut as I grabbed my keys. I didn't even think about it, just got in the car and started driving. The streets were calm as I made my way toward the bakery. My mind was racing. Images from the past few weeks flashed in my head, every little detail I'd tried to brush off, the late nights, the long bakery trips, those texts from Ben B. When I got close, I parked a block away, trying to keep my cool. I wanted to play it casual, like I was just another customer grabbing coffee. But the second I saw her car parked out front, my heart skipped a beat. I couldn't deny it any longer, this wasn't a quick trip to pick up pastries. She was here for him. I walked up to the bakery and peered inside. There she was, sitting at one of the small tables by the window, laughing softly as she leaned in close to the guy I'd seen last week, the one with the flour-dusted apron. Ben. They looked so comfortable, like they'd done this 100 times before. She was sipping on a coffee, and he was smiling, that kind of smile that's a little too familiar, too intimate. I stood there, watching them, completely frozen. Part of me wanted to burst in and confront her right then and there. But another part of me couldn't even move. It was like my body had locked up, forcing me to watch the scene in front of me. After a few minutes, I stepped back, out of sight, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. This wasn't just a quick bakery visit. This was something else. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I got back in my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My mind was spinning, searching for explanations, but all I could see was that look on her face, the one she used to give me, now directed at someone else. I sat in my car, staring at the bakery, watching for them to come out. Minutes ticked by, but there was no sign of Lily or that guy, Ben. The bakery's front door stayed shut, and the lights inside dimmed as the early morning rush slowed down. I felt this tight, burning knot in my chest. I'd had enough. I wasn't going to sit around while they did, whatever it was they were doing. I took a deep breath, got out of the car, and marched up to the bakery. But when I reached the door and peered inside, the table by the window was empty. I stepped back, feeling my heart sink. They were gone. They hadn't come out the front, I'd been watching the whole time. I scanned the street and the parking lot, but her car was still there. They had to be somewhere nearby. Then, it hit me. The back entrance. I walked around the side of the bakery, feeling this mix of anger and dread building with every step. The alley was quiet, just an empty delivery area with a few crates stacked along the wall. There was a metal door near the back, slightly ajar, leading into what must have been the bakery's kitchen. I paused, debating whether I was actually going to do this. Was I really about to walk into that kitchen and confront them? But before I could second-guess myself, I heard voices coming from inside. Her voice. Low, soft, like she was whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, gentle, intimate. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my ears as I leaned toward the door, straining to catch every sound. I heard him laugh, a quiet, familiar laugh that felt like a punch to the gut. And then her voice again, playful and teasing, so different from how she'd been with me lately. I couldn't stand it any longer. I pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit kitchen. Flour dusted the counters, the scent of freshly baked bread hung in the air, and there, at the far side of the room, I saw them. They were leaning close, her hand on his arm, his fingers resting lightly on her waist. They froze the second they noticed me, Lily's face going pale as her eyes widened. Ben straightened up, but didn't step back, his arms still just inches from her. And in that split second, everything was crystal clear. "What's going on, Lily?" I said, my voice barely steady. She opened her mouth, struggling for words, but I wasn't interested in any excuses. I just wanted the truth, and from the look on her face, I finally had it. Lily's face flushed as she walked over to me, trying to put on a calm expression, like she could smooth this over. "James," she started, her voice a bit too casual, "I was just, the head pastry chef, Ben here, he suggested I try my hand at baking croissants. You know how much I love trying new things." She laughed nervously, glancing at Ben, who just stood there, avoiding my gaze. I looked between the two of them, the obvious tension in the air, her hand still hovering near his arm. I couldn't hold back. "And, hugging?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Is that part of the recipe, too?" She froze, her eyes darting back to me. For a second, I could see her mind racing, trying to come up with an explanation. She forced a weak smile. That was an accident, James. It just happened." "An accident?" I repeated, disbelief thick in my voice. "You accidentally decided to hug him?" "Look, I know how it looks," she said quickly, her eyes pleading with me to understand. "But it's not what you think. We were just talking about baking, and I got a little carried away." She looked away, then back at me, as if she actually believed that I would buy it. But I wasn't buying anything. Not this time. "Carried away?" I repeated, keeping my gaze steady. "Is that what you call sneaking out early to spend time with him?" Lily opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ben shifted awkwardly, like he wished he could disappear, and I watched the two of them in silence, waiting for one of them to finally admit the truth. The car ride home was silent. Lily sat beside me, staring out the window, her hands twisting in her lap. I kept my eyes on the road, barely glancing her way, my mind spinning with the questions I didn't even know how to ask. I was exhausted, anger and disbelief pressing down on me like a weight. When we got home, Lily mumbled something about needing a shower and slipped upstairs without another word. I stayed in the living room, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. I needed to clear my mind, so I decided to distract myself with work. Maybe diving into a project would be enough to numb the thoughts racing in my head. I opened my laptop, clicked into my inbox, and froze. There, at the top of my emails, was a message with no subject, from an address I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd ignore something like that, but something about it. I couldn't explain it, but I clicked. As the email opened, my heart dropped. Attached to the message was a single photo, taken in that dimly lit bakery kitchen. I could see the flour-dusted counters, the faint glow from the lights above, and, right there in the center of the frame, Lily and Ben. They were locked in an unmistakably passionate kiss, his arms wrapped around her waist, her hands tangled in his hair. The look on her face was one I hadn't seen in a long time, a kind of intensity, a rawness that cut through me. I felt my stomach churn, my hands shaking as I stared at the image, unable to look away. There was no mistaking it now. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a simple hug. This was real, undeniable proof of something that went beyond accidents or getting carried away. She'd been lying, and this photo was the proof I hadn't wanted to find. The words on the screen felt cold and taunting, "Thought you'd want to know." I sat back, numb, the weight of the betrayal settling deep in my chest. I had no idea who had sent the email, but right now, it didn't matter. All I knew was that my marriage had just shattered beyond repair, and there was no pretending anymore. I sat there, staring at the photo, the reality of it all sinking in like a lead weight in my chest. I felt my whole body tense up, fists clenched as anger flooded through me, overriding the sadness and confusion that had taken over just hours before. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. Lily had lied to me, again and again, with every excuse, every dismissive smile. And I wasn't going to just sit back and let her walk away from this. I reached for my phone, almost in a daze, and pulled up my contacts. It didn't take long to find the number of a lawyer I knew from years back. We'd talked about financial planning once, and I remembered him mentioning divorce cases he'd handled for some high-profile clients. He was good, and he didn't mess around. I hit call, the ringing in my ear only heightening my resolve. When he picked up, I kept my voice steady, as if discussing business. "Hey, Rob. I need to talk about a divorce. And not just any divorce, I want to make sure I take everything she has." There was a pause on the other end, and then he cleared his throat. "James, I didn't expect this from you. Are you sure this is what you want?" I barely hesitated. "She's been cheating, Rob. Lying to my face. And I want her to feel every bit of it." I could hear the anger seeping through, but I didn't try to hide it. "I want to keep the house, the accounts, everything. And, if there's anything you can do to make sure she's left with nothing, then that's what I want." Rob stayed silent for a moment, likely processing the change in my usually calm demeanor. Finally, he spoke, his voice firm and certain. "All right. We'll make sure you're in the best position possible. I'll handle everything. And if you're serious about getting thorough with this, we can set up a plan that makes it hard for her to recover financially." A part of me felt cold hearing those words, but the anger wouldn't let me back down. I wasn't stopping there. "And about him, the baker," I added, practically spitting the words. "I want to make sure his life isn't the same after this, either." Rob hesitated, understanding that this went deeper than just the divorce. "That might take some time, James. But I'll see what we can do, quietly. We'll dig into him, find out anything useful." "Perfect," I replied, feeling the satisfaction of a plan taking shape. "Send me the details, and let's start as soon as possible." When I hung up, I felt a dark satisfaction. I wasn't just going to be a bystander in my own life while she and her new friend carried on as if nothing had happened. They would both pay for this, and I was going to make sure of it. After I hung up with Rob, a strange calm settled over me, like the storm inside had found a direction, a purpose. But to really make this work, I needed more than just a single photo. I needed undeniable, concrete evidence of what had been going on between Lily and that pastry chef. So, I spent the rest of the day pulling myself together and digging deeper. I went through old texts, bank statements, and even her credit card transactions. I needed to understand just how long this had been going on and how many lies she'd spun to keep it hidden. It was like piecing together a twisted puzzle, and the more I found, the angrier I got. The credit card statements were especially damning. There were frequent charges at the bakery, but it went beyond that. Restaurant bills I didn't remember, hotel charges I'd never seen before, all clustered around the same time she claimed she'd been working late or meeting friends. My stomach churned as I looked at the dates, each one a tiny betrayal I hadn't even known about. And then, there was her phone. After hours of stewing over what I'd found, I decided to look through it one last time, trying to trace back anything I might have missed. There were deleted messages, but she'd overlooked her photo gallery. I scrolled through, looking for anything out of the ordinary, and finally, I found what I'd been dreading, a hidden album titled Moments. My heart pounded as I opened it. There were more photos of her and Ben, selfies taken at the bakery, him standing behind her, arms around her waist, his flour-dusted hands resting on her stomach like he had every right. There were photos of them at what looked like a weekend cabin, smiling, holding drinks, cozied up on a couch. My hands started to shake, but I forced myself to keep scrolling, each image a reminder of just how little our marriage must have meant to her. With every new piece of proof, my resolve grew stronger. There was no way she was going to walk away from this unscathed. And that baker? He was just as responsible. He'd played his part willingly, probably enjoying the secrecy, the thrill of being the man on the side. But that thrill was going to cost him. I called Rob back, updating him on what I'd found and sending him the photos. He sounded impressed. "James, well, it's exactly what we need. With this evidence, it's going to be very hard for her to come out of this with much of anything. You've got a strong case." "Good," I said, the anger in my voice barely contained. "Now, what's our next step?" Rob and I discussed our next moves. He explained how we'd use the evidence I'd gathered to make a strong case in the divorce, positioning me to keep the house, most of our assets, and any financial advantage we could. But it wasn't just about the logistics. Rob could sense how personal this was for me, and he was willing to go the extra mile to ensure that Lily and her Baker boyfriend faced consequences beyond the typical divorce fallout. "James," Rob said, a hint of caution in his voice, "there's one thing we could consider, if we're willing to play a bit dirty." I leaned in, listening intently. "Go on." "We could leverage these photos, along with any other communications you find, to make things very uncomfortable for her, and for him. Publicly, I mean," he said, carefully. "If this gets out, it could impact her reputation, and, well, it sounds like this Ben guy is trying to build his own business. A scandal like this wouldn't exactly help him." I thought about it, letting the words sink in. Ruining her reputation publicly would change things forever. I imagined what it would be like for her friends, her family, maybe even her work connections, to see her as she really was, someone who'd thrown away her marriage for a fling with a pastry chef. And as for Ben, he'd learned just how costly it could be to come between a husband and wife. "I want to do it," I said, my voice steady. "Let's put together everything we need. I want this handled carefully, but I want her to know exactly what this has cost me, and what it's going to cost her." Rob agreed, his tone firm. "We'll be thorough, James. If this is the path you want, we'll make sure it sticks. I'll gather the documents we'll need to file. In the meantime, keep gathering any evidence you can. Emails, texts, anything that paints the picture clearly. When we present this to her, she won't have much ground to stand on." As I ended the call, I felt a grim satisfaction settling in. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. I'd played the part of the understanding, supportive husband for too long, and now, it was my turn to set the stage. And maybe, just maybe, when she saw everything she was about to lose, she'd finally understand what she'd thrown away. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm. With the plan in motion, every small detail felt purposeful. I'd spent years being considerate, patient, and devoted to Lily, but now I was finally acting for myself. It was as though I was seeing everything in my life with a new clarity. Lily was already up, moving around the kitchen, her usual routine playing out like nothing had changed. I watched her for a moment, noting how natural she looked, humming quietly as she poured coffee. The thought crossed my mind that if I hadn't found out about her affair, I'd still be here, believing this was my life, my marriage. But that illusion had shattered, and there was no putting it back together. I took a breath, steadied myself, and walked into the kitchen. She looked up, giving me a tight smile. "Morning," she said, almost cautiously. She knew there was tension, but she didn't know the full extent. "Lily," I said, keeping my tone even, "we need to talk." Her face tensed, and she put her coffee cup down, shifting uneasily. "What's going on?" "I know about you and Ben," I said bluntly, watching her reaction closely. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, a flicker of panic crossed her face before she forced a calm expression. "James, it's not what you think." "Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "I've seen the photos, Lily. The ones you didn't know someone else took. I know about the charges on the credit card, the weekends with friends that were actually weekends with him. I know it all." Her face went pale, and she bit her lip, trying to find words. "James, listen, I can explain. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, it just happened. I was lonely, and you were lonely." I repeated, disbelief tightening my voice. I was here, every day, supporting you, trusting you, and you were out there with him. So, don't talk to me about being lonely. She reached out, as if to place a hand on my arm, but I stepped back. Look, I don't know how to fix this, she whispered, her voice small, for the first time truly seeing that her choices had consequences. I made a mistake. But please, James, we can work through this. We've been together for so long. I met her gaze, my expression unyielding. Lily, I don't think you understand. This isn't something we've worked through. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, and I intend to keep everything. She looked stunned, tears welling up as she tried to process my words. You're serious, she choked out, realizing she was losing everything she'd taken for granted. Completely, I replied. And as for Ben? I'll make sure he feels this, too. I turned and left the room, leaving her standing there, speechless. The first part of my plan was done. Now, all that was left was to make sure it stuck. The confrontation with Lily left me feeling vindicated, but I wasn't finished yet. I'd taken steps to protect myself in the divorce, but there was still one loose end to deal with, Ben. He wasn't going to walk away from this unscathed. I'd spent the rest of that day gathering more information on him. I went online, checking business reviews, social media, anything that might give me an edge. And that's when I found a surprising detail, a local food blog that had featured Ben in an article about rising culinary stars in our city. He'd been building his reputation for a few years, and his bakery had recently started gaining traction. It was clear he was trying to expand his business, and any scandal would be bad news for him. I called Rob, who had a contact in public relations. After explaining the situation, he suggested something bold. We'd leak the story anonymously, but we'd do it carefully, hinting that Ben was involved in an affair with a married woman. We wouldn't name Lily, but we'd make sure it was enough to stir interest and suspicion. All it would take was a few whispers to send shockwaves through the local business community, where reputations were everything. Rob helped me draft a few anonymous tips that we'd circulate to some local blogs and social media influencers. By the end of the week, I'd sent the tips out, and within days, whispers about a scandal involving the hot new baker in town were already spreading. Then, I set the final piece of the trap. I called the bakery, disguising my voice as best as I could, and asked for Ben. When he picked up, I kept my tone icy and calm. Ben, I said, you don't know me, but I'm the husband of the woman you've been seeing. There was silence on the other end, and I could practically hear his panic through the phone. I know everything. And so will everyone else if you don't back off, I continued. You're already getting attention online, and it's not the good kind. So if I were you, I'd think carefully about my next move. He stammered, trying to come up with something to say, but I didn't give him a chance. Stay away from her, I warned, and get ready to watch your reputation crumble. I hung up, feeling a grim satisfaction settle over me. The wheels were in motion. All I had to do now was sit back and watch it all unravel. In the days that followed, everything started to come apart for Ben. Word of the affair had spread quickly through town, especially among the foodie community that had once celebrated him. Local blogs picked up the hints we'd planted, and soon enough, the gossip reached his customers. The bakery's once glowing reviews started to shift. Comments popped up about his lack of integrity and questionable ethics. Some regulars even posted they'd be finding their pastries elsewhere. Meanwhile, at home, Lily was a shadow of her former self. She tried to talk to me several times, making weak attempts to justify her actions, to claim it had all been a mistake. But I had nothing left to say to her. I slept in the guest room and avoided her whenever possible, focusing on the divorce proceedings with Rob. I could tell that Lily was beginning to feel the weight of what she'd done, seeing it reflected in the silence between us, in the walls that had gone up around her once comfortable life. One evening, I heard her on the phone, talking to someone in a desperate, hushed tone. She didn't know I could hear her, but her voice was pleading. She was talking to Ben. "I can't believe you didn't tell me about this," she hissed. "My life is falling apart, and all you care about is your bakery. You know, you said this would be different." I felt a grim sense of satisfaction hearing her in distress, realizing that her actions were costing her far more than she'd anticipated. I knew Ben must be feeling the pressure as well. He was losing his business, his reputation, and now the woman he'd thrown everything away for was slipping through his fingers. Later that week, Rob and I met to go over the final divorce paperwork. He laid everything out clearly: the house, the assets, and the accounts would largely go to me. Lily was left with the bare minimum, and any chance of a comfortable financial future was hanging by a thread. She'd have to start over, rebuild everything she'd lost, and it wouldn't be easy. "You've done well here, James," Rob said, looking at me with a nod of approval. "This will be hard on her. It won't just hurt financially. Her social standing is bound to take a hit. The connections, the image, all of it's tied to what she's lost." I signed the papers, feeling a heavy sense of closure settle over me. This chapter was nearly over. All I had to do now was hand her the finalized documents. The day I handed Lily the divorce papers felt like the last piece falling into place. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed. I could see that she'd already guessed the outcome, but the reality of it, the signatures, the division of everything we'd once shared, brought a fresh wave of sadness across her face. "James," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But does it really have to end like this?" I looked at her, searching for any trace of the woman I thought I'd known. "You ended it the day you started lying to me, Lily," I said, my voice steady. "You were the one who chose to let him into our lives, into our marriage. I'm just closing the door on what's left." She swallowed, looking down at the paperwork, her hands shaking as she flipped through each page. She tried to find something to say, but there were no words left. She signed the documents in silence, her pen trembling against the paper, each signature marking the end of something I'd once believed in so deeply. After she'd signed, I stood up and gathered the papers, feeling a strange sense of peace. The anger, the hurt, all of it had finally started to release its hold on me. I wasn't the man I'd been before, but I felt lighter, free. As I walked to the door, she followed me, lingering behind like she wanted to say something, to reach out one last time. But there was nothing left to say. "Goodbye, Lily," I said quietly, looking at her one last time. She nodded, her eyes filling with tears, and before I could second-guess myself, I stepped outside, closing the door on our past. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild. I threw myself into work, into reconnecting with friends and family, into the parts of myself I'd neglected during those years of trying to make things work. Slowly, I felt a sense of renewal. I wasn't the same person who had trusted so completely, but I was stronger, wiser. As for Lily and Ben, I heard through the grapevine that Ben's bakery eventually shut down. Lily moved to a different city, distancing herself from the fallout. And while I didn't know where they ended up, I knew I'd left that part of my life behind. The journey had changed me, but it had taught me something invaluable: that trust is sacred, and when it's shattered, there's a part of you that changes forever. But with time, healing, and the strength to let go, I knew I could start again, wiser and ready to rebuild a life I could trust, this time, on my own terms.